Okay, so it took me 8 months to get a new one up, or nine, not almost not 8.5, 8.5 months to get a new one up for the finalists. Took 1 day to get the next one up after that. 1985, the Philadelphia Flyers went on an incredible run, and because Mike Keenan was their coach, there was some fun along the way, and there was some fun after, and I'll get into that. They played 19 games in these playoffs. They beat the Rangers in 3. So again, we're looking at a best of 5 first round. They beat the Islanders in 5 in the next round. Then they beat Quebec in 6 before they ran into the Edmonton Oilers and lost in 5 there. But it really looked like a pretty even matchup at the start of the finals. I remember watching this, and there wasn't a feeling like the Oilers were necessarily going to be a dynasty yet. There was just a feeling that, okay, so they've won their Stanley Cup, but can they really do it 2 years in a row? And the Flyers came in as a big team, a strong team, a lot of depth, and they had the best goalie in the league as well. This was the last year, though, and I know this is a video about the Flyers, but this was the last year that we saw any team play in 3 straight Stanley Cup finals. And that was the Edmonton Oilers, who won 2 of them and lost the other one. They lost the one in 83. They would not be back in the finals for 1986 when they got knocked off by the Calgary Flames. In this finals, it started off looking pretty good for Philly, and then it kind of fell apart. Their leading scorer is Brian Propp, who's one of my favorites. He's not in my Hall of Fame yet, but he's going to be. 8 goals and 10 assists. Tim Kerr, 10 goals and 4 assists. I've got Tim Kerr in my personal Hall of Fame. Todd Bergen, 4 goals and 9 assists. And you know, there's storylines that get past me regularly. And then I look at them and I go, wow, how did I not do a video on this? Todd Bergen with 13 points in the playoffs. He played 14 games in the regular season at 11 goals, 5 assists, 16 points. So why haven't we heard of him? Because he got buried. Todd Bergen had an abdominal injury, and Mike Keenan decided the best way to deal with an abdominal injury was to work through it. So he would put Todd Bergen through the grinder, basically. And maybe it was because he was a rookie. Maybe it's because he didn't like him. But he puts Bergen through the grinder. He had him doing extra workouts, various practice things that you may not ask a guy who's injured to do, and he would have teammates watch him. So if Keenan was going to be busy doing something else, he'd be like, all right, probably Kerr and Sutter and these guys, okay, you guys make sure he gets that done. I want to make sure he gets that done. So Bergen's injuries were pretty bad, and I think Keenan, by the looks of it, must have thought he was faking or something. So what happens is Bergen, puts up 13 points in 17 games in the playoffs. He played 17 of the 19 that the Flyers played. By today's standards, I think he would have been a folk hero. And yet, in September of 1985, he was suspended by the team for retiring. He retired because he wasn't going back to play for Mike Keenan again. The guy who had made him play while injured and made him work out while injured. So he gets traded to the Minnesota North Stars in fall of 1985. And the North Stars actually take a look at him and they're like, oh, you're injured. To which he probably responded, yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I suspected that while I was doubled over in pain and Keenan's telling me to do more push-ups. And so he missed the entire 85-86 season. The funny thing was, before the Flyers relented and traded him, he had announced his retirement in September, to which they had suspended him. Imagine that. I quit. You can't quit, you're suspended. He announced he was going to be a professional golfer, so when they asked Bobby Clarke, they said, well, what are you going to do with Todd Bergen? He answered, well, I can't trade him. Who am I going to trade him for, Lee Trevino? Which I thought it was a good line from GM Bobby Clarke, but it shows that the Philadelphia Flyers, and I always thought this, I always thought Clarke was too hard on the players. And when you got Clarke and Keenan together, oh boy, this was young Mike Keenan. This was the tough, rough and tough Mike Keenan. One of my Hockey News annuals actually has a whole write-up, about 4 pages on Mike Keenan. I may go through it at some point. I've had a request to do a Mike Keenan video. And I do think that this kind of incident underlines why that would be a really good idea. but let's get past Bergen. I had to discuss that. That's why there's the asterisk, because I knew I had to discuss this. Let's go ahead and pan down a little bit. See, there's Bergen right there. Ron Sutter, 4 goals and 8 assists. Mark Howe, 3 goals and 8 assists. He's the only Hall of Famer on this team, which to me seems off. Murray Craven, 4 goals and 6 assists. Crossman, 4 goals and 6 assists. Peter Zezel, a goal and 8 assists. Dave Poulin, 3 goals and 8 assists. Ilka Sinisalo, 6 goals and 1 assist. Joe Patterson, 3 goals and 4 assists. And then Rick Tocchet with 3 goals and 4 assists. So yeah, Tocchet's kind of buried on the scoring sheet of this team. And of course, the big thing with this Philadelphia Flyers team, this is Pelle Lindbergh year. Pelle Lindbergh, 12-6 in the playoffs, 2.50 goals against average, 914 save percentage. He passed away November 11th, 1985. He had a 6-2 record in the 85-86 season before he passed on. He was involved in a car accident. He had been drinking, and I think that was when we realized some things about hockey players, and I think this was when hockey players started taking some of that seriously. Hey, it had been a known thing in Flyers locker room in the 70s that certain players might drink before games, and as long as you scored, they didn't care. Your personal life, really, they didn't really care what you were doing as long as you went out on the ice and played well. And I think some of that changed after what happened with Pelle. And it's too bad because we'll never know. We'll never know how good he could have been. He had a Vezina trophy to his name in 1985. He played sensational getting there. So let's talk about how they got there. The Rangers in the first round, they won 5-4 in overtime in Game 1. Then they won Game 2 3-1, and they won 6-5 in Game 3. Nothing spectacular about Lindbergh's run there. But round 2, they play the Islanders. Game 1, he shuts the Islanders out 3-0. And that's impressive. And I don't care what era you're looking at, shutting down those New York Islanders, who, yes, they were tired, they were beat up, and they were getting older, but still, it's New York Islanders. They won Game 2 5-2. They won Game 3 5-3. They lost Game 4 6-2 because the Islanders were down 3-0. They weren't getting swept. But then they didn't have anything left in the tank for Game 5, which the Flyers won 1-0. Now, in the next round, focus. All right, stupid focus. It's all the white space. The white space my camera goes, I don't like it, and it just decides not to work. So they beat the Islanders 1-0 in Game 5, and so that's twice in 5 games that this guy, Pelle, shut out the New York Islanders. Round 3 against Quebec, they lost 2-1 in overtime, and I remember watching this series. I was really a big fan of the Quebec Nordiques. So when you talk about my dislike for Montreal and why do you dislike, hey, my favorites, Boston would become a favorite, and Quebec was one of my favorites right from the beginning. And so you had to pick a side in the Battle of Quebec, and I picked the Nordiques, because why not pick the team that's not going to exist in 10 years? But anyways, Quebec won Game 1 over Philly 2-1, and I thought, this is it, they're going to the finals, and no. Philly wins the next 2 games 4-2, same score for both games. They lost Game 4 5-3, and then they won Game 5 2-1 before a shutout again in Game 6. So this is where the folk hero status for Pelle Lindbergh comes in. He scores himself 3 shutouts, twice in elimination games for Philly, and the other was a Game 1 against the New York Islanders, the famed Dynasty New York Islanders. And in the finals, he wins Game 1 4-1. So Pelle Lindbergh is full on status as the greatest goalie ever in Philly, and this is not that long after Bernie Perrant's retired, and yet at that point I think Lindbergh was the most popular player in Philadelphia, probably in their history. And then Game 2 they lose 3-1, and this is where controversy starts. They lost 4 in a row, so they lost the next 3 by scores of 4-3, 5-3, 8-3. In the last game they played, Pelle Lindbergh was in net. Edmonton scored 4 times in the first period and just cruised to an 8-3 win. But the interesting thing with this is this was a 2-3-2 format. So baseball has the 2-3-2 format. You play 2 games in one city, 3 games in the other city, and then you go back to the home field advantage for games 6 and 7. Hockey's tried it a few times. 2-3-2 means that the team that doesn't have home ice kind of has home ice. So the first two games played in Philly. Philly wins the first one 4-1. They lose the next game 3-1. The next three games are played in Edmonton. Edmonton, with this 2-3-2 format, went 6-0 at home both years that it was implemented. So in '84 against the Islanders, and then in '85 against Philly, they won 6 at home in the playoffs. And that right there is it's not the reason why Edmonton won. We all remember them as a dynasty, rightfully so. But it really is hard. You're really skiing uphill if you're the Flyers in this series. And you look at this team, and like I said, the only Hall of Famers, Mark Howe. I still think Tim Kerr at some point should get in. Brian Propp won't. He was never an elite guy. Pelle Lindbergh didn't play long enough, obviously. But it's kind of weird to me because this Flyers team was hardworking. Rick Tockett's a guy as well you could argue could get in the Hall of Fame. They were tough. And it was a Bobby Clarke team. And because it was a Bobby Clarke team run by Mike Keenan, who would be back in the Stanley Cup final 2 years after this, Todd Bergen's career was only 14 games long. He never played in the NHL again after this series. He did play briefly for, I believe it was the Springfield Indians, for the Minnesota North Stars affiliate, but he never went back to the NHL again, and he struggled with injuries, and then he retired again to go back to trying to be a professional golfer. I assume not being traded for Lee Trevino. But there you go. The 1985 Philadelphia Flyers, a team that almost did it, and we would remember them quite differently if that series had been a little closer in the finals. Because the 1987 finals, that was a finals for the ages, but we're not there yet. So thank you guys for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.